I was at a department store when my mother loudly said, "Don't steal anything this time." A cashier glanced at me. My hands were empty. But she whispered, "She always does this, doesn't she?" I couldn't breathe. I'm Sylvia Monroe. I'm 36 now. I live alone in Savannah, Georgia, a city that somehow manages to feel peaceful and heavy at the same time. The Spanish moss hanging off the trees always feels like ghosts frozen mid-sentence. Maybe that's why I like it here. It mirrors my life. For most of my existence, my mother Lorraine dictated who I was allowed to be. I was an only child. My father left when I was 8. To everyone else, my mother was a hard-working single mom who did her best after being cruelly abandoned. To me, she was something else entirely. I didn't have words for it when I was younger. Emotional abuse? Gaslighting? Narcissism? I didn't even know those were real things until I was much older. From as early as I can remember, my mother controlled me through humiliation. But she had a particular weapon she loved using more than anything, publicly accusing me of being a thief. It started small when I was a kid. We'd be at a store, and she'd loudly say something like, "Make sure you don't put anything in your pockets, Sylvia." People would glance at us. I'd feel my face flush with embarrassment. She'd smile sweetly, like it was a joke. It was never a joke. When I was 12, she took it to another level. We were at JCPenney at the mall. She was shopping for a dress for some office party. I was bored, wandering around the jewelry display while she picked through racks. At some point, I noticed her standing too close to me, but I didn't think much of it. As we walked out, the security alarms blared. Store employees rushed over. A pair of cheap stud earrings had somehow made their way into my coat pocket. I was mortified. I remember crying, insisting I didn't do it. My mother gasped, put her hand on her chest, and told them I'd been acting strange all day. The store let us go after a stern warning. In the car ride home, she didn't scold me. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe now you'll learn to be careful. People are watching. Nobody will believe you if something like this happens again." It wasn't about me stealing. It was about her power to control how others saw me. And I carried that stain for years. Every time we were in public after that, she'd drop little comments about keeping my hands visible, or she'd loudly remind me not to touch things. Over time, she planted this image of me as someone untrustworthy, first in front of strangers, later in front of friends, family, teachers, coworkers. It became my silent shame. I moved out at 18 for college in Athens. At first, I thought I was free. I kept my distance, barely visiting, but my mother always found ways to claw back into my life. Emotional manipulation, guilt trips, veiled threats about money or her health. The cycle never really stopped, it just changed shape. Now, fast forward to this year. She was about to retire after 30 years working as a receptionist at a dental clinic downtown. She had built herself into a well-respected member of the community, charming, friendly, helpful. Most people adored her. She was throwing herself a grand retirement party and insisted I help her shop for a dress. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We went to Belk at Oglethorpe Mall, a big, well-lit department store that felt safe, neutral. I thought, maybe she'll be on her best behavior for once. Of course, she wasn't. We were in the accessories section. She was holding up some scarves, and I was idly browsing through a rack of handbags. I wasn't even holding anything. Then, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, she said, "Don't steal anything this time, Sylvia." I froze. My stomach dropped. I could feel eyes on me. My face burned with humiliation, but I stayed silent. I knew better than to engage when she was performing. A young cashier nearby looked up. She had kind eyes, maybe in her 20s. Her name tag said Mira. She studied me for a moment. I tried to keep my face neutral. As I started to walk away, Mira quietly whispered, "She always does this, doesn't she?" The words hit me like a slap. I glanced at her, wide-eyed, and she just gave me a tiny nod of sympathy before returning to her register. Something shifted inside me at that moment. It was like I'd been underwater for years and finally surfaced for air. Someone else saw it. Someone saw through her act. The rest of the shopping trip blurred by. I barely registered what she bought. On the car ride back to my apartment, she tried to make small talk like nothing had happened. I sat silently, staring at the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, as we pulled into my driveway, I said, "You humiliated me back there." She sighed dramatically. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Sylvia. Honestly, you've always had such a flair for drama." "You've done this my whole life," I said quietly. "Stop acting like a victim. You should be thanking me for keeping you out of trouble when you were younger." I wanted to scream. Instead, I let her get out of the car, waved her off, and sat in my driveway long after she'd gone inside. My whole body was shaking. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. That night, something inside me broke loose. I couldn't push it down anymore. The old memories started bubbling up, clearer than they'd been in years. The earrings. The countless other incidents. The time she'd call my college dorm to accuse me of hiding things from her. The passive-aggressive remarks to my boyfriends. The comments to coworkers that made them subtly distrust me. I realized, she wasn't just abusive. She was strategic. She had been building a version of me in everyone's mind for years. A petty thief. A liar. A daughter who struggled with impulse control. She was a master at planting seeds and letting them quietly grow. And for the first time in my life, I wanted revenge. The next few days were a blur of old memories resurfacing. Things I had forgotten or maybe forced myself to forget came back in waves. It was like unlocking a box I didn't even know I had kept sealed all these years. The earrings were only one example. When I was 16, I had a part-time job at a small boutique. My mother stopped by one evening when my shift was ending, all smiles and fake sweetness in front of my manager. She wandered around the store as I cleaned up and chatted with my boss, Melinda. Right before we closed, a pair of bracelets went missing. The next morning, the owner called me in and gently asked if I had seen anything. My mother had been the only customer left in the store that night. I denied any involvement, but I could see suspicion in Melinda's eyes. She never accused me directly, but after that day, her friendliness cooled. My hours were cut. Eventually, I left. And my mother? She acted outraged on my behalf, like a protective parent. "How dare they imply my daughter would steal," she'd say loudly to anyone who'd listen. But every time she did it, I could hear the subtle undercurrent beneath her words. "See how they always doubt you? You'll never escape it." I had no proof. No one would believe me. That's how she operated, never anything clear-cut enough to point at, but always leaving a faint cloud hanging over me. And now, I realized I finally had something, myself. My own voice. And, as it turns out, a few people who had seen behind her mask. A few days after the department store incident, I went back to Belk alone, specifically looking for Mira. I waited near the register until her shift started, nervous but determined. When she spotted me, she smiled kindly. "Hey. You okay?" I swallowed hard. "I just wanted to thank you for what you said the other day." Mira glanced around to make sure her supervisor wasn't hovering, then leaned in slightly. "I've seen people like your mom before. They like to make a show of it, get people looking at the wrong person." She shook her head. "I don't know what her deal is, but you didn't deserve that." I exhaled like I had been holding my breath for days. "Would you be willing to write something down?" I blurted out before I could lose my nerve. "Just, for my own record." She looked at me for a long moment. "Is she dangerous?" "Not physically. But, she's ruined a lot for me." Mira nodded slowly. "Yeah. I'll write something." That was the first domino. After that, I started collecting everything. I dug through old emails. Voicemails where she berated me. Texts laced with subtle threats and backhanded guilt trips. I reached out to a few people from my past who had seen glimpses of her behavior, old friends, former coworkers. Some of them didn't want to get involved, but a few agreed to make statements. Then I remembered Zoe. Zoe had been my roommate for a semester during college. We hadn't been close back then, but we'd kept in loose contact through social media. She worked for the Department of Family and Children Services now. I didn't know if my situation even qualified as something her department handled, but I was desperate for guidance. We met for coffee on a warm afternoon at a cafe downtown. As soon as I started sharing, it all came pouring out: the earrings, the store accusations, the boutique incident, the constant psychological warfare. Zoe listened quietly, her face growing more serious by the minute. Sylvia, she said finally, what you're describing is sustained emotional abuse and targeted reputation sabotage. This isn't just a difficult mother-daughter dynamic. I laughed bitterly. Try convincing anyone else of that. She's got everyone wrapped around her finger. Zoe leaned in. That's what people like your mom do. But you have something rare, a paper trail. Documentation. Witnesses. That cashier? Huge. Most people don't get that kind of third-party validation. I hadn't thought of it that way. Look, she continued, I can't guarantee anything. But I can help you put together a full case file. If anything, you can use it to protect yourself legally if she ever tries to smear you again. And that's what we did. It took weeks. After work, every night, I'd dig through old phone records, social media messages, even old birthday cards she'd written that were laced with passive threats disguised as loving motherly advice. I contacted the old boutique. The owner didn't remember much, but Melinda, my former manager, did. She agreed to give a statement about how uncomfortable my mother had made her feel that night. The more I gathered, the stronger I felt. Like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of my own history. My truth. Meanwhile, my mother kept calling, texting, acting like nothing had happened. Don't forget the party next month, sweetie. Make sure you dress nicely, I want everyone to see how well you turned out. The audacity. The sheer gall of this woman. She was preparing to parade me around at her retirement party like a trophy. Proof of her successful parenting. And that's when the idea fully crystallized. I wouldn't just collect the evidence to protect myself. I would let her hang herself with her own lies. Publicly. The weeks leading up to my mother's retirement party were excruciating. Every phone call, every text from her felt like sandpaper against raw skin. She was bubbling with excitement, entirely oblivious, or perhaps arrogantly confident, that she still controlled the narrative. Everyone's coming, she gushed one afternoon over the phone. The dentists, the assistants, even Dr. Warner's wife is flying in. This will be such a beautiful evening, Sylvia. You'll make me proud, won't you? Make her proud. That was rich. I smiled stiffly, the phone pressed to my ear. Of course, Mother. The rage inside me simmered quietly, but I'd learned how to hold it. There was something oddly empowering about pretending to play along, knowing what I was building behind the curtain. With Zoe's help, my file was growing thick, printed screenshots of texts, statements from Mira at Belk, Melinda from the boutique, even a brief statement from an old family friend, Mrs. Hawthorne, who remembered my mother's suspicious comments at a Thanksgiving dinner years ago about me borrowing things without asking. Each piece alone sounded mild, innocuous even. But together, it painted a damning picture. I didn't know exactly how far I wanted to take it. Part of me was scared. What if this blew up in my face? What if people still didn't believe me? What if I looked like the bitter daughter trying to ruin her saintly mother's big day? But the more I sat with it, the more I knew I had to see it through. Not just for me, but for the version of myself she had tried to bury for decades. A week before the party, Zoe called. I did some digging, she said. I reached out to someone I know in the licensing board for healthcare employees. Nothing official yet, but if your mom's conduct even hints at workplace manipulation or patient-related issues, they may open an inquiry. I nearly dropped my coffee. Wait, an inquiry? Zoe hesitated. Sylvia, you said she's been working there for 30 years. You honestly believe you're the only person she's played these mind games with? And that's when another layer of the onion peeled back in my mind. She hadn't just done this to me. She likely had manipulated coworkers, assistants, patients even, all while maintaining that sweet, gentle public face. If a full investigation started, her retirement party would be the least of her worries. I didn't sleep much that week. Anxiety gnawed at me, but beneath it was an unshakable sense of justice humming like electricity in my veins. Finally, the day of the party arrived. It was held at a rented event hall in downtown Savannah. My mother spared no expense: caterers, florists, white tablecloths, twinkle lights strung across the ceiling. She was in her element, circulating through the crowd, her sugary smile never faltering. The dentist she worked for praised her, the staff cooed about her years of dedication. I watched it all from a corner, my glass of wine untouched in my hand. My stomach churned as I listened to people toast her. The most reliable woman we've ever had, someone said. Lorraine, you're like family to all of us. The rage bubbled under my calm exterior, but I held it. Timing was everything. About halfway through the night, Dr. Warner got up to give his speech. He was one of the senior dentists, a man who had known my mother for over 2 decades. "Let's give a hand to Lorraine," he said, smiling broadly. The room erupted in polite applause. My mother beamed, resting her hand dramatically over her chest like an actress accepting an award. "She's not just a receptionist," Dr. Warner continued, "she's been the heartbeat of this practice. We couldn't have done it without her." The applause grew louder. And then it was my turn. My mother had arranged for me to give a speech, one last little performance where I could gush about how wonderful she was and what an incredible mother she had been. Another opportunity for her to cement her public image. As I walked up to the microphone, my hands trembled slightly. I forced a smile. My mother watched me from her seat in the front, her smile tight, her eyes warning, "Be good." I took a breath. "Good evening, everyone," I started. "For those of you who don't know, I'm Sylvia, Lorraine's daughter." Polite chuckles from the audience. I've been thinking a lot about what to say tonight. 30 years is a long time. My mother dedicated so much of her life to this clinic. To all of you. To this community. I glanced down briefly, pretending to collect my thoughts, while my heart hammered against my ribcage. Many people here know her as warm, reliable, hardworking. And she is. I paused again. The audience waited. My mother's smile twitched, just barely. She sensed the shift but didn't know which way it was going yet. But there's another side to dedication that doesn't always get talked about. The sacrifices. The stress. The ways we sometimes create stories to keep control of things when life feels chaotic. A few people shifted in their seats. My mother's smile thinned further. I continued, voice steady now. "I've learned a lot growing up with my mother. About appearances. About reputation. About how easily truth can be twisted if you say something often enough." Her face paled slightly. "Sometimes, protecting an image becomes more important than protecting relationships. More important than protecting your own child." I could feel the energy shift in the room. Whispers. Awkward glances. My voice softened but sharpened at the same time. For years, I lived under the shadow of accusations that weren't true. Suggestions that I was untrustworthy. That I was dishonest. That I was a thief. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd now. My mother's hand gripped her wine glass tightly. But every lie has a shelf life. I let the silence hang there, letting the words land. That's why I'd like to thank a few people tonight. People who spoke up recently. Who witnessed moments when my mother's version of the story didn't match reality. The room was silent now. Some people avoided eye contact. Others stared at me wide-eyed. My mother looked frozen. I'm grateful to those who finally gave me a voice. After all these years. I stepped away from the microphone, letting the silence speak louder than my words. The party didn't end immediately, but the air had shifted irreversibly. The polite applause that followed was thin, mechanical. The conversations afterward were stilted, cautious. People started leaving early. A few whispered apologies to me as they quietly slipped out. My mother sat frozen at her table long after most of the guests had left. Her smile gone, her eyes darting nervously around the half-empty hall. She didn't approach me. She didn't say a word. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. The days following the party were strange. At first, there was a kind of quietness that didn't feel real. My phone wasn't blowing up with angry texts from her. No guilt-laden voicemails. No "how could you" tirades. Just silence. But the silence wasn't peace. It was tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. I knew my mother well enough to know she wouldn't sit in humiliation without trying to regain control. That was her nature. Control was her oxygen. She couldn't survive without it. Sure enough, a few days later, I started receiving phone calls. Not from her, but from people connected to her world. One of the dental assistants. A receptionist from a nearby clinic. Even an old neighbor from my childhood. "Hey, Sylvia, listen, your mom's been saying some things. She's claiming you're having some kind of breakdown. She said you've always struggled with episodes." Classic Lorraine. When the facts are against her, shift the narrative. Make yourself the victim. Paint me as unstable. But this time, I was ready. I calmly told each caller that I understood they felt uncomfortable being caught in the middle, but that everything I said at the party was true. And if they wanted to know more, I had the documentation to back it up. Most of them didn't ask further. A few apologized. One or two went quiet, and I knew they had probably started seeing cracks in the image my mother had carefully constructed for decades. And then came the moment I had anticipated, the professional fallout. About a week later, Zoe texted me, "Zoe, it's happening. Licensing board opened a formal inquiry." I called her immediately. "They're reviewing several personnel complaints filed by former staff at the clinic," she explained. "Turns out you were just the tip of the iceberg." I stood at my kitchen counter gripping my coffee mug, feeling my pulse hammer. "She manipulated others too?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "More than you know," Zoe said. "It looks like a few of the younger assistants were afraid to report her behavior before. The way she'd talk down to them, plant rumors, make vague accusations about dishonesty or missing items. It wasn't as public as what she did to you, but enough that several people came forward once the inquiry started." I felt lightheaded, not from shock, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen. Finally being believed. Now the retirement party wasn't just an awkward evening, it had become a trigger point that started unraveling her entire carefully maintained professional image. About 2 weeks later, I got the text I never expected to receive from her. "Mother, we need to talk." For a moment, I stared at my phone, heart pounding. I almost didn't respond. Part of me didn't even want to give her the satisfaction of my attention. But something inside me told me to see this through. This wasn't about a confrontation anymore, it was about closure. We met at a little coffee shop near Forsyth Park. Neutral ground. Public. She was already sitting when I arrived, hands folded tightly on the table, her face tight and pale. I sat down wordlessly. The air between us felt like glass stretched to its breaking point. "You've destroyed my life," she said flatly, not even bothering with pleasantries. I said nothing. I just stared at her. She continued, voice shaking slightly. "You humiliated me at that party. Do you know what people are saying about me now? 30 years I gave to that clinic." I finally spoke, my voice calm and low. "And 30 years you spent manipulating people. Including me." Her nostrils flared. "You're exaggerating. You always did." I pulled out a small manila envelope I'd brought with me and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of some of the written statements, Myra's account, Melinda's statement from the boutique, text messages she'd sent me over the years, even a few emails where she'd implied my history to others. "Exaggeration?" I said quietly. "This isn't my imagination, Mother. This is your pattern." She glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. I could see her pride warring with her panic. "You've always needed someone to control. Someone to make small. That someone was me for a long time. But I'm not your puppet anymore." Her lips pressed into a thin, brittle line. "And you're what, a hero now? You've torn apart your own mother's life." I smiled softly, genuinely. "No, Mother. I didn't tear apart your life. You did. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." She stared at me for a long moment. The silence between us was heavy. Finally, she scoffed bitterly. "I hope you're satisfied." I leaned forward just slightly, holding her gaze. "Actually, I am." And for the first time I saw it. Not rage. Not triumph. But something close to fear. Because she knew. She knew that for the first time in my life, I held the power. And there was nothing she could say or do to spin her way out of it. Her inquiry wasn't criminal, she wasn't going to prison, but her perfect reputation was crumbling. The licensing board flagged her conduct as creating a hostile and unethical work environment. Several of her old coworkers severed ties with her. Her grand retirement plan fell apart. Her carefully curated social circle shrank. The invitation stopped. People started seeing her for who she really was. And as for me? I felt free. I left that coffee shop that day and never spoke to her again. There was no dramatic final screaming match. No courtroom battle. No physical cruelty. just exposure. And consequences.